Whether or not Game Pass should continue being supported by Xbox has been a conversation for a long time. It's mostly been a kind of a console war conversation. One side saying that Game Pass isn't sustainable, the other side saying it's the best deal in gaming, which I still think holds pretty true. But with the way the industry as a whole, and specifically Xbox, has been for the last few months, really the last couple of years, even with their acquisition of Activision Blizzard King, it kind of seems like maybe Game Pass is the problem, and maybe its future isn't as secure as many hoped it would be, including likely the higher ups at Xbox. So today I want to talk quickly and just kind of go off the cuff about kind of what may be the factors of Game Pass in the current situation for Xbox, what they are probably going to do in the future moving forward, and what I think they should do, which may be different things. We'll discover that all together. To kick it off, I did a little poll. Didn't have a ton of results, but had enough that it's worth talking about. And I asked on Twitter, YouTube, and Discord, should Xbox continue supporting Game Pass? Nice, simple question. One of the things that drives me nuts on the internet when people do polls and stuff like that is people almost always make the questions and the answers leading to their whatever result they want. As someone who studied statistical analysis and things like that in college, it drives me nuts when people do complicated polls. This one's very simple. Yes or no answer. Should they continue supporting it? 64% yes, 36% no. So roughly 2/3 yes, 1/3 no, right? And I think that's interesting. And I don't know. I would guess if you actually polled like the greater Xbox community, it'd be a higher number. I bet it'd be 75% or higher. If you polled the greater gaming community, it would probably be about this, if not a bit lower, due to skepticism about Game Pass, especially due to recent actions, I would assume. There is an argument to be made right now that some of the decisions around the layoffs, studio closures, and so on with Xbox have been due to Game Pass. The idea is that with Game Pass, you spend the same amount of money to make a game as you would anyways, but instead of selling that game for 50, 60, $70 a pop, you put it on the Game Pass where people are paying, I think it's 10 to 15 or 16, $17, whatever it is now. I guess it depends on if you have PC and console or not. And you just give it to those people as part of that cost. Now, if those people only play your game and pay for Game Pass for 4 months, then it probably equals out to roughly the same amount of profit, right? But the problem is that that's not what happens. At least it shouldn't be. Maybe with the Call of Duty gamers, that's what's going to happen. But what really happens is someone has Game Pass. Maybe they get it for one game. And then you almost every month, in my experience, have something to at least try out. Maybe not something you're going to dive into, you're going to make it your entire gaming life, but you're at least going to try it out. And what that leads to is this really cool service for consumers where you can just check stuff out. And, it's a lot of indie stuff, it's a lot of older stuff, but it's pretty often newer stuff as well. Even day one things every now and then. Obviously, all the first parties so far for Xbox are day one on Game Pass, but they've even done third party. A Plague Tale Requiem, the sequel to A Plague Tale Innocence, was day one Game Pass on Xbox. It still came out on PlayStation and PC, but it was just a normal structure with them. You just paid for it, and you could just pay for it on Xbox if you don't have Game Pass, or you could just play it. And that's where a lot of these conversations start coming down. There's all of these nuances. Like, is Game Pass good for the studios, for Xbox's studios, for their first parties? Is it good for big third parties? Is it good for small third parties, like indie studios and things like that? And we've gotten mixed results in talks and things over the years of it kind of seems like for the first party studios, it might not be sustainable. especially because there may be some kind of old school thinking of, well, that game didn't sell many millions of copies of itself, not taking into account, well, yeah, it didn't because it's on Game Pass, so it got played by people, maybe one time or maybe for months, but there was no physical actual sale of the game, right? For the big third parties, especially ones who are under other publishers, Game Pass seems like kind of a scary deal, right? You often, or at least in the past, would get this opportunity where Xbox would basically pay for the development of your game, right? Or at least in some part, depending on the deal you put together. But then you have, say, a game like Guardians of the Galaxy in the old Square Enix, right? Where if you put a game like that on Game Pass with a publisher who is pessimistic in general about sales especially of their Western studios, even if Xbox pays, a big hunk of money to pay for part of the development, and even if I think that they give like rewards for tiers hit on Game Pass, so many players playing it, downloading it, and so on. The problem is that if your publisher only cares about unit sales, and one of the platforms has extremely altered unit sales because of Game Pass, then that may not be very attractive, right? And I think we've seen that play out. Lastly, we have the small indie teams who it seems like are the ones that benefit the most, especially ones without a publisher who do like a co-publishing agreement with Xbox or something where they get, probably fairly easily their development costs paid for. And they'll probably, and if anything, it typically is like marketing for them where, they'll put it on Game Pass, people will like it, and then it's pretty good chances people will go to Steam and buy that game and so on and so forth, right? So, like, from the developer side, from the studio side, it seems like it's at least still an okay deal. From the consumer side, I would argue it's still an amazing deal. It's the best deal in video games still. But then what it really comes down to is what about the publisher side for Xbox? And that's where it seems like maybe we're hitting an impasse where maybe it's not sustainable, because I think especially the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King has been a big turning point for the sustainability of Game Pass. Because especially now that Xbox seems to have the eye of Microsoft way more than they did before, they spent $70 billion on them and years of legal disputes. It seems like before ABK, they would maybe be able to gut this out. Maybe they'd be able to get enough cadence of games that, they could take that 25, 30 million subscriber number and get it closer to the 100 million number they want by 2030. Probably never quite there. I would say 50 million is way more realistic, especially counting like PC players and stuff. But instead, now they have this situation, which I don't remember people really talking about, but it makes sense now, where you get Call of Duty in your first party lineup, and now you especially probably have the folks at Microsoft looking over Xbox being like, wait, that game sells 30 million copies every single time they put one out, no matter how good or bad it is. No matter how good or bad it is. And they have been selling that at $70 a pop, and it happens still. Now you guys are just going to make it part of Game Pass, which, I don't know the numbers of sustainability there. My rough estimate is that Game Pass, assuming the number of free users has gone down a lot, which I suspect it has, over $4 billion a year is what I guessed, which seems like a lot, and is. It's if you average out the cost of development of your games to 100 million a pop, you're talking about 42 games that can support development of. The number is getting real wacky here, so don't take it too seriously. But something is giving us the impression that maybe it isn't sustainable. And especially with Call of Duty, I suspect, and rumors are, that it's a hard sell to Microsoft for them to put this on Game Pass. And then it comes down to this conversation of, if Call of Duty isn't on Game Pass, if one of their first party games isn't on Game Pass, a big part of keeping it multi-platform, because they're still going to release it on PlayStation and obviously PC. A big part of that conversation was like, yeah, it's going to be on PlayStation, but we're going to be able to give it to people on Game Pass, right? If that doesn't happen, I start to make the argument of why have Game Pass. Now, what I think they're actually going to do is, well, they have a few options. They can cut Game Pass entirely. They're not going to do that. Too much invested into it, at least in my opinion. They can raise the price, which there's rumors going around right now that there's a new tier, which I actually think is a bad idea. Because if you tack on a new tier that's going to like include Call of Duty or something, you're really, I think, gonna miff the people on the current tiers. But maybe not. Like, maybe not enough of those people care, and maybe you're designing that new tier just for Call of Duty folks. Maybe that works. Or you modify Game Pass. And so what I think they're actually going to do is just add this new tier, and it's going to include Call of Duty. Maybe the current Game Pass will have the game, like the single player, and base multiplayer, and then this next tier will give you like all of the seasons and all of the passes and all that. Like, they could do that without making people too mad, I think, and probably boost their numbers quite a bit. What I would do, and what I think they will do in the long run, is I think we're going to end up with some situation kind of like PlayStation Plus, but better, where you'll pay $15 a month for Game Pass, whatever it is, or 10 to 15, maybe 10 for the base and 15 for PC and console. I don't know. And you just won't get first parties day one. Maybe you'll get them 3 months later, 6 months later. Maybe it depends on the game. But you get into the situation where they say, hey, we tried to do Game Pass and we talked about it for years. We pumped it up. We put a bunch of money into it. We bought all these studios. It's just not working. So we're going to take a different route. So we're still going to have Game Pass. The whole back catalog, still there. All the third-party deals we're making, still there. All of our first parties will be there, but not day one. We're game by game, we're going to do 3 to 6 month waits. We're going to let those games sell naturally for the people who are really motivated, who want to play it day one, aka Call of Duty, and obviously other franchises that people are like Gears and stuff like that. And then around the time that like motivated sales happen and those start to trail off, we'll throw it on Game Pass so everyone else has their bite at it, and that's how we're going to do it. I mean, I think that's the best route. I don't think they're going to do that anytime soon. I think we're going to go another year or two of them trying to make Game Pass work the way it does. It's going to all depend on Microsoft's patience. And then I still think at some point they're going to come out and say, it was a great experiment. We've had a lot of fun with it. We've learned a lot. And here's the results of what we've learned. And I think that would be fine. I think what's tough about it is I think the average informed gamer would be cool with it. The uninformed ones probably wouldn't even know anything's changing. But then you just know that the super connected influencers, the content creators, journalists, and all that, this is just going to be another nail in the coffin for Xbox, right? Well, they don't even have Game Pass now, so what does Xbox even have anymore? So I suspect when they make any moves, they know that's coming, especially the way the media environment has been around Xbox the last few months. And really, I think really since they acquired Bethesda, and then it's ramped up a lot during the acquisition of ABK. And then obviously in the recent events, even though everyone's doing the same stuff, they're all firing, they're all shutting down studios. It seems like one platform gets the ire of their eye a bit more, but that's the way it is. That's obviously going to be a crap show if they change Game Pass or if they whatever they do to it. I still think that getting rid of Game Pass entirely is the least likely thing, just because there's really no reason not to offer at least like the most minimum version of it, like $10 a month, all of the old games, all of the first parties after a year, and then any third party deals they can make, $10 a month, and then everything else you just buy. I think that's like the most severe thing they would ever do. But especially with the way they have like cloud gaming integrated and things like that, I just don't see them ever entirely dumping Game Pass. But we're gonna have to wait and see. I suspect being a fly on the wall of the meeting rooms at Microsoft and Xbox corporate over the next, especially 30 days before the game showcase, would be really interesting because all their teams are trying to prep trailers and gameplay and get all of that stuff ready for the games they can show, while their corporate side, Phil and all the people underneath him, have to be saying like, yeah, like we can show off all these games and get people excited, but there's a funk in the air around Xbox right now, and I'm sure they're trying to decide like, do we address it straight on? Do we just not deal with it during the showcase? We keep that happy, and then maybe we address everything else later. I'm really curious to see what they do. I think at least a vague acknowledgement of what's going on, maybe even not an acknowledgement of the shutdowns and the layoffs, but maybe a really clear message, which they're not very good at, of here's what's coming for Xbox. Here's all the games. Here's what we're thinking on hardware. Here's what we're thinking about Game Pass. Here's what we're thinking about streaming. And just give some clarity. Give people some comfort and something to believe in, even though that's going to be tough because I think trust is at an all-time low for Xbox. And I think really big AAA publishing in general. I just don't think anyone trusts Xbox or PlayStation or Ubisoft or 2K or just anyone. I don't think anyone trusts anyone right now, and that may not be Xbox's problem to solve on their own, but they still have to try to do their part. So I'm really curious to see what happens, and I'm curious to what you think. So down in the comments below, let me know what you think Xbox should do with Game Pass. If you like this video, hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stuff like this. I plan on covering all these things pretty extensively, including Hellblade 2, not Helldivers, even though I have talked about that quite a bit. Anything else Xbox, anything Mass Effect or BioWare or The Division, Ubisoft, I try to talk about it all. So subscribe if you want that. If you really want to support these videos, my podcast, my stream, consider becoming a YouTube member for some nice little perks there, which is mostly getting videos early and a fun little logo beside your name when you comment. And I think that's all I have for this one. So until next time.